Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Tales in the Dark. We're excited to bring you Story 12, an unsettling account that will make you question the very space you sleep in. If you enjoy eerie, spine-tingling tales, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. Story 12, The Old Lady's Bed. Towards the end of my 8th grade, my mom found a job opportunity in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and decided we'd move there. It was just her and me, so we had my sister and her husband come to help us pack. The drive from Milwaukee, where I'd been living for about a year, to Sheboygan took a little over an hour. Moving was nothing new for us. I'd grown used to shifting from one unfamiliar place to another, where the walls always seemed to hold whispers of whoever lived there before. In some of those homes, I'd experienced little things, barely worth mentioning, really, like the soft thud of footsteps in the hallway or the door that slowly creaked open when the room was empty. Those moments felt more like a passing chill, a flicker of something I could dismiss if I tried hard enough. We spent about a week packing and organizing, prepping everything for the big move on Saturday. The plan was simple. Load up the small U-Haul my mom rented, hit the road, and arrive at the new house around noon. But since my sister and her husband had driven 6 hours just to help, we couldn't resist taking them out for lunch and exploring Milwaukee a bit. By the time we got back, it was afternoon already, and we didn't finish loading until later in the evening. My sister drove her car, my mom drove hers, and my brother-in-law took the U-Haul. Although the drive to Sheboygan was just an hour, it stretched on and felt endless. We finally pulled up to the house around 9 p.m., with the sun dipping below the horizon, leaving the sky a dim, bruised purple. My first impression of the place felt off. The house had an old, heavy look to it, and the only lights outside were a dim porch light and another single bulb above the detached garage in the back, barely illuminating anything. The house itself was 2 stories, with the owner's family living on the 2nd floor. Darkness was closing in fast, so we rushed to unload. Thankfully, because we moved so often, we didn't have much. It took only a short time to bring everything inside. Once everything was piled into the house, I wandered around to get a feel for the place. The front door opened directly into a living room with a dark, worn carpet that felt strangely heavy underfoot. Beyond that, the kitchen spread out with old vinyl flooring, and to the right of the kitchen was the bathroom. The master bedroom lay just beyond that, with the other bedroom on the opposite end. After looking around, I chose the master bedroom, feeling an odd mix of excitement and hesitation. One thing I noticed immediately was how all the old furniture was still there, left behind by the previous tenants or perhaps even the owners. A faded sofa, a scratched TV stand, and in the master bedroom, a large vanity and a queen bed that seemed to absorb the shadows around it. I brushed it off, thinking it would save us the hassle and expense of getting new furniture. But somehow, the silence of the house seemed thicker with those old things left behind. The house carried this dense, dark atmosphere, almost like a heavy fog, even with every light turned on that first night. It was as if the bulbs didn't have the strength to fully chase away the shadows lurking in each room, leaving corners dim and strange shapes barely visible. As we settled in, we had one last late-night dinner with my sister and brother-in-law before they drove back home. My mom urged them to stay. It was nearly midnight, but they insisted on leaving. After they left, the silence of the house felt thicker, pressing against me. My first night there was restless. I couldn't sleep. The master bedroom felt strange, and the unfamiliar bed carried an odd, almost intrusive chill that seeped through the covers. The air was heavy, dense, as if the house itself was watching, waiting. About a week into living there, I found myself home alone often, since my mom worked late and sometimes wouldn't get back until midnight. It was during these times alone that things started to happen. Small things at first, but enough to make my skin prickle. I noticed frequent, soft footsteps around the house, Sometimes it sounded like they came from upstairs, but they felt too close, as though they were walking on my ceiling from the upper floor, almost directly above me. Other times I'd hear bare footsteps in the kitchen, a slow, sticky sound, like someone's foot pressing and lifting off the vinyl flooring. The rhythm was deliberate, as if someone were pacing, lingering with each step. And sometimes I'd hear the bathroom door creak open, inching its way into the hallway with a hollow groan. After a while, it would slowly close, the latch hitting the edge of the strike plate before stopping just shy of clicking shut. Whenever I left my bedroom door open, exposing the darkened kitchen, I'd sometimes catch a glimpse of something, a shadow slipping quickly across the kitchen, just at the edge of my vision. Other times, it was a still figure, standing in the middle of the room watching. But whenever I turned to get a better look, it would disappear, leaving me doubting my own eyes. Nights were the worst. Lying in bed, I'd see something in the corner of my eye, a shadowy figure standing in the doorway or just inside my room. But each time I turned my head, it vanished, like a memory fading too quickly to hold on to. It felt like I was never truly alone, like something was watching, waiting for a moment when I wouldn't turn around. As time passed, I began waking in the dead of night to strange sounds in my room. Sometimes it was the faint, almost hesitant sound of footsteps, as if someone were pacing slowly back and forth. These sounds would last only a few seconds and stop the moment I fully awoke. I'd sit up, scanning the room, but there was never anyone there. Then, the footsteps grew bolder, no longer shy of my awareness. I'd wake up, lying still, only to hear them, clear and undeniable. Someone was moving around my room, each step as vivid as if they stood right beside me. I knew it wasn't my mom. She rarely entered my room at night. Fear gripped me as I lay there, waiting for the footsteps to stop. Only then would I dare reach for the light, casting it around the room, trying to catch a glimpse of whoever, or whatever, had been there. One early morning, I woke to the sound of strange music filtering through the house. My mom sometimes played music in the mornings as she prepared for the day, and I'd grown used to her familiar playlist. But this tune was different, an old, haunting melody in a language I recognized but couldn't understand. It wasn't something my mom would listen to. Half asleep, I brushed it off, assuming she'd just found something new to play, though I'd never heard her listen to anything in that language before. When I finally got up, feeling hungry and fully awake, I stepped into the kitchen, hoping to find breakfast waiting. The moment I entered, the music cut off, leaving an eerie silence. That's when I noticed the darkness, the lights still off, and a chilling realization struck me. My mom had already left for work. The house was empty, dark, and utterly silent. A heavy, pressing weight settled over me, like a gaze I couldn't see but felt from the corner of the living room. The sense of being watched intensified, rooting me in place. I couldn't bring myself to look toward the shadowed living room, as if something in the dark waited for me to turn its way. Heart pounding, I turned and ran back to my room, closing the door behind me, the thin barrier feeling like my only protection. That day, I stayed shut in my room, listening to the silence. Every so often, the quiet would break with the soft sound of footsteps, padding through the kitchen and living room as if someone were moving through the house, waiting. Over time, I started to connect with the neighborhood kids and would spend my afternoons with them whenever my mom was at work. Every day, right after she left, I'd head straight to a friend's house, not wanting to be alone in that place any longer. The strange occurrences were becoming more frequent, and each day seemed to bring something new. Now, it wasn't just the footsteps or the creaking doors. That unfamiliar, haunting music had started playing at random times while I was home alone, its eerie melody drifting through the rooms, making my skin prickle. One night, after staying out late with my friends, I walked back to the house, feeling a growing unease as I approached. In the dim light, I could make out my mom's car parked out front, and I felt a flicker of relief. She must be home, I thought. As I got closer, I noticed a figure standing by the door, a silhouette of a woman, waiting, thinking it was my mom. I felt reassured, assuming she'd come outside to wait for me, knowing how unsettled I'd become in that house. But as I drew closer, something felt wrong. The figure standing there wasn't my mom. It was a woman, slightly hunched, a bit heavier, her frame smaller and shorter than my mother's. Her posture was unnatural, leaning slightly forward as if she were staring intently at something or someone. I brushed it off, thinking maybe it was a friend of my mom's who had come to visit. But the closer I got, the colder I felt, as if an icy wind were pressing against me. Just then, the front door opened, and I saw my mom step outside, heading toward her car as if she'd forgotten something. I froze, my eyes darting back to where the other woman had been. In that split second, she was gone, vanished as if she'd never been there at all. A chill ran down my spine, and I bolted to the house, not daring to look back. I didn't tell my mom what I'd seen. I couldn't bring myself to speak of it. But that night, sleep was impossible. I lay there, wide awake, feeling that familiar heaviness, that sense of being watched, pressing down on me. And I knew, somehow, that I wasn't alone. A couple days after seeing the unfamiliar woman at the front door, I woke up in the dead of night to the sound of footsteps in my room again. My body tensed as I lay still, not daring to move, hoping it would pass like before. But this time, the footsteps felt different. Each soft, deliberate step grew closer, the sound creeping toward my bed, inch by inch. I could feel my heart racing, my breath shallow, as the unseen presence drew nearer. Suddenly, I felt a weight pressed down at the edge of my bed. The mattress dipped, shifting as though someone had just sat down beside me. My pulse thundered in my ears as the weight stayed there, unmoving, pressing down with a sense of quiet, almost casual intent. Then, slowly, I felt the bed sink even further, as if someone were lying down next to me. A chill crawled up my spine, and every instinct screamed at me to move. Finally, gathering the courage, I bolted out of bed, flipping on the light as I turned to face whatever, or whoever, might be lying there. But the bed was empty. No one was there. That night, I left the lights on, sitting wide awake, my eyes darting to every shadow until the first light of dawn finally seeped into the room. The following night, I woke up again in the dead of night, bracing myself for the familiar footsteps. But this time, there was only silence. Relieved, I managed to drift back to sleep, thinking perhaps the worst was over. About an hour later, I was jolted awake. Something felt wrong, the air thick with an unsettling stillness. I hesitated but slowly opened my eyes, turning to my left. And there she was. An old woman lay beside me, perfectly still, with her back turned toward me. Her body looked lifeless, cold, and unmoving, with thin, wispy black hair that barely covered her scalp. The faint glow from the window cast just enough light for me to see her frail shape, lying inches away from me. I froze, a cold terror gripping me as I realized what was happening. My mind raced, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would give me away. I lay there, paralyzed, fearing what might happen if she turned around. I held my entire body tense as I waited, each second stretching into an eternity. Finally, the terror became too much to bear. I let out a scream, leapt from the bed, and flicked on the light, my eyes darting back to the mattress. The bed was empty. Shaking, I ran to my mom's room, barely able to explain through my panic what I had seen. That night, I slept on the floor in her room, too afraid to return to my own bed. The next morning, my mom and I decided to speak with the neighbor upstairs, a relative of the landlord. She listened quietly as we described what had happened, and then told us something that made my blood run cold. Before we'd moved in, The landlord's elderly mother had lived on the first floor for years. She had spent her last days there, receiving hospice care until she passed. The furniture, the sofa, the vanity, the bed, they'd all belonged to her. In fact, the bed I'd been sleeping in had been hers, her last resting place before she died. The landlord didn't want to pay to remove her belongings, so he'd left them behind, leaving her presence lingering in every darkened corner. After listening to the neighbor's story, I began to understand why my room had been haunted. It was her room. Every night I had been sleeping in her bed, and when she returned to the room, she couldn't rest on it, which is why she paced back and forth. The footsteps, the creaking door, the unfamiliar music, they were fragments of her life, echoes of her presence still lingering in the house as if she were unaware she had passed on. The following night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep in that room, knowing it was her bed I had been lying in. For the next month, until my mom found us a new place, I avoided the room as much as possible, haunted by the feeling that she was still there, quietly reliving her final days. As we close the chapter on this unsettling tale, we're reminded that sometimes the spirits of those who've passed develop attachments to their belongings, to the spaces they knew, to the routines they cherished. They linger, unaware they've crossed over, repeating what was once familiar, as if they are still among the living. For the old lady, her attachment to her bed kept her tethered. She paced, perhaps disturbed that her resting place was no longer hers. And as time went on, her spirit seemed to find the courage to return, to lie down beside the living, seeking rest in the only place she knew. It wasn't merely a haunting. It was a tragic echo of a life that hadn't realized it had already ended. If you've been captivated by these spine-chilling stories and yearn for more journeys into the unknown, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Because here, in Tales in the Dark, the shadows are never far, and the next story is always waiting.